All right, we're ready. Good morning, everybody. So this is our 8th installment of EO Exchange. The feedback has been fantastic. I don't know if I've done all 8, but I've probably done 6. I think they're great. And so thanks for being here this morning. So today we have our panel is 2 folks from First Horizon, one of our great SAPs. Thank you for all of that. So David Jones and Matt Knight, good morning. And then from EO, Drew Goodmanson and Robert Hartline are going to be helping us through this morning. A couple housekeeping things really quick. So bottom of the hour, it's going to be time for Q&A. So as the discussion is going on today, just drop your questions in the chat and we'll be ready to roll. And then at 9:45, we'll have our breakouts. And those are usually very valuable, I think, to go back and kind of small group discuss what we've been talking about this morning. So should be ready to roll. So put the questions in the chat and we'll go from there. So to introduce our panel, first of all, from First Horizon, we have David Jones. David is a native of Nashville, veteran banker at Middle Tennessee Market with over 35 years of experience. Most recently, he served as the VP of Institutional Advancement at Martin Methodist College. Prior to his time there, he spent most of his banking career in various market leadership roles, credit administration, as well as 5 years as the business banking team leader for Middle Tennessee. He's a fellow graduate of the University of Tennessee, and probably we were winning football games back then like they were when I was there, but not anymore. LSU Graduate School of Banking, the Scarlet Executive Program at Belmont. He serves on the board of Junior Achievement and is the current board chair of Healing Housing. So welcome, David. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Richard.
Yep. Matt Knight has worked also with First Horizon. Matt has worked in the financial services industry for a little over 20 years. He currently focuses on providing a team approach to managing the comprehensive financial affairs for a select group of clients. He's a board member of Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and he is a graduate of the University of Louisville. So one of my favorite cities. And thanks to First Horizon and both you guys for being here. EO side, yep, awesome. From the EO side, we have Drew Goodmanson, and he's been a member since EO member since 2009. Sold a SaaS company in 2015 and was part of the 2017 private equity deal of the year that bought and consolidated over 40 companies. Small deal, it sounds like. Since then, his company helped build the exit story for entrepreneurs to build and ultimately sell for at least $10 million more than they thought. A very interesting tidbit to me, he was part of a professional card counting team. It took $4 million from different casinos, and he and his wife were once the most wanted card counters in Las Vegas. He's clearly good at math and a quick thinker, and he is never invited to my card game. So there's that. And finally, Robert Hartline was selling cell phones from his trunk of his car in college in 1994 down in Murfreesboro, and he built a chain of 56 wireless stores called Absolute Wireless in 1998. Amazing. Robert sold Absolute in 2020, and now he is focused on leading Callproof, which is an app for outside salespeople that he started about 10 years ago. He enjoys teaching other entrepreneurs how to manage the energy of sales staff and sales leadership with a mixture of technology and lessons learned in the field with both Absolute Wireless and his Callproof clients. And finally, when he's not working or traveling, he and his wife are raising 2 young boys, which is always fun. So thank you guys for being here. Robert, I'm going to toss the ball to you, let you take it, and we'll start getting the questions about 9:30 if that works.
Hey, that's fantastic. I appreciate everybody getting on the call today. You know, writing this presentation over, I'm setting my timer for 8 minutes, but it's been an interesting ride. And what I'm mostly going to talk about today is the emotional roller coaster that comes with selling your business or your baby for that matter. Real quick, I'm gonna share my screen just for a minute. I'm not gonna go too deep in these slides, but it's just kind of a reference point for me. But I wanted to show you this screen. Does everybody see my screen? Give me a thumbs up if you do. Regret. And I want you to simmer on the word regret for a moment. And this is a lesson of don't be like Robert, okay? Because I am left with some regrets. And I've highlighted missed opportunity because in hindsight, I learned a tremendous amount about my business in 2020. 2020 it is what it is. We don't need to talk about it, but I want to show you this. This is my emotional roller coaster, my emotional energy going through what happened last year. As we stated, I've been a wireless retailer. I used to have 66 stores through time. And beginning of the year, they had us close down a bunch of stores. But I was super excited about the T-Mobile and Sprint merge because I was finally going to be able to sell a network that rocked. I was excited about that. I was a Sprint dealer and the network was never strong in the markets that we served. And I was finally excited to sell something I was proud of. And I don't know why it says on a scale of 1 to 12, but let's go with 1 to 10 is our emotional energy. But as the merge happened, man, I was super stoked. I could not have been more excited about doing what I was doing. And what I love to do, I love to train and mentor the millennials people because millennial staff that we had, I loved working with them because most of them lacked any inspiration to do anything challenging in their life. They're just used to things kind of handed to them. And when you start engaging with them and teaching them how to sell and teaching them how to do their own self-improvement, it's intoxicating the excitement that you get with working with teams and getting them to realize their potential. So I really enjoyed that part of the business. But 7 days into the merger, I noticed that none of my stores had proper T-Mobile signs. They had banners because T-Mobile hadn't put the new signage up. I noticed that we had fallen off of Google. And some of you might even seen an email that went out saying that I had fallen off of Google. I needed some help, but it made a dramatic impact to our sales in our stores. Our call volume dropped 20%. Our traffic dropped 40%. I mean, who walks into a business with, banners flapping in the wind? It's a tacky way to do things, but it is what it is. My buyer reached out via LinkedIn. I got excited, had what I felt like was a fantastic offer. But I knew that there was some more store closures coming. So I could not execute the deal because we were both, the buyer and me, were waiting to find out what was going to happen. And my father-in-law passed away. And that just took a tremendous amount of emotional energy out of this whole process. And, I had no intention to sell last year. I didn't go into the year saying, hey, I'm going to sell this company. But with Corona, people being sick with Corona, me closing down stores because people saying they're sick when they weren't sick. I mean, the emotional toll that people running retail or restaurants faced last year was just unbelievable circumstances. And I was emotionally done. And then when we found out in November 17th that they had us close another 12 stores, we had to renegotiate the deal, and the deal dropped 33% in value overnight with dropping those 12 stores. And something I wasn't ready for, which was they put me in a situation where I had to make a decision to do some owner financing, which is not something I had ever prepared for or was ready for. But make a long story short, these just kind of goes through these little emotions that I went through throughout the year. But I'm going to get to the lessons in a second. But all in all, you have to be ready for the roller coaster. And if you're going to be ready for the roller coaster, you need to know what to expect. So I'm going to go over a couple of things that I wish I had done. Now looking back, that I learned so many things. Number one, regrets happen when your plan isn't executed. Your role as the CEO is to make sure you're using all the resources wisely. I talk to a lot of people who say, well, I'm not ready to sell my business because, I'm having fun. But I want you to think for a moment and contrast what happens when your loved one is sick and you need to spend time with that loved one and devote all your energy. Or maybe you are sick. So being ready to sell is a necessity of our business. It's not a nice to have. One of the things I noticed when I started shutting down the company is I realized that I had people not doing all the things they should have been doing as their role. And the core one was my accountant. I noticed in NetSuite that my accountant was probably spending 10 hours a week in our core accounting software. And just think about that for a moment. We all have these IT systems, whether it's the email, whether it's your HR system. I had discovered that my HR managers were in recruiters were calling prospective new hires weeks after they submitted their applications. And in the world of retail, we are always hiring. And so knowing that up front, I could have saved so much angst had I known that my operations team was not clued in. Another thing, do the hard things now or else. When you go through an audit process and try to discover exactly what your team is doing Monday through Friday, you're going to notice some things that have to be fixed. And a lot of those have to be fixed are hard conversations. And, when you're kind of a problem solver kind of person, you trying to, we're naturally the types of people that kind of want to make everybody happy, but doing hard things doesn't mean we make people happy. It's doing the hard things right, because otherwise you're going to get hit later. I put this in here right here. It says outsourcing reporting to virtual assistants. I'm beginning to believe more now than ever that most entrepreneurs have way more staff than they really need. They're operating ineffectively with some of their team members. And if you getting a virtual assistant to handle the reporting aspect of the company is a good use of your resource. Your resource in my mind, I want to have the best people that I can afford to be face-to-face with clients, right? Or be face-to-face with my team members with leadership. So utilize those resources that we all have available with having a virtual assistant. Last but not least, your partner matters. Your spouse can help you through that emotional roller coaster to help you, because it's a lonely journey. Because remember, when you go to sell your company, you're breaking up with your staff. Crazy story. The day that we got approved to sell T-Mobile, I'm going to turn the screen off here if I can find that. The day we got approved to sell our stores, we had to get approval from T-Mobile. My partner accidentally emailed a member of our team, thinking it was a person. He was actually intending to email one of our landlords to negotiate to get out of a lease. And he basically accidentally emailed an employee. And so that's how our company found out that we were selling. And imagine how toxic that is to have the key members of your team that you're not having a private conversation with, telling you about to sell the company. So be ready for some wild surprises, but having a partner that can walk through that emotional roller coaster, and last but not least, have a coach during the sale process, because there's no possible way you can deal with your emotions and negotiating at the same time. You cannot do those two tasks. You got to have a coach along with you. Sorry, I went a little bit over.
No worries. I would definitely echo what Robert said. I remember it was in March of 2015 where I was going to sell the company, and I made that decision. And that night, I almost had a panic attack, just kind of freaking out, and really had an existential crisis of like, who am I? Because I had really found such an identity as an entrepreneur, and I couldn't even see myself kind of being anything else. So to reiterate that, I've seen that a lot. One of the things when I decided to sell in March, I actually, because of that, moment, that crisis, I didn't sell, and I ended up selling 6 months later. And in that interim time, I went and I got a therapist to kind of help walk me through the emotional journey, to even kind of get me prepared. So that is, I think, an underrated part of this sale is the emotional roller coaster. So I appreciate it. I remember reading a Harvard Business Review article that said something like, "Hey, congrats on selling your company. Now get ready for depression." And there's a whole article about how often and common that is. So I'll share my screen. I put together a couple of slides as well, just from some of the learnings, because, after I sold, as it was said, I got really curious on, I gave the story that, like, as an entrepreneur, I felt like I was in a sandbox and I was playing with all my toys and I was super happy. And, I was tinkering with the company. And when I sold and joined this private equity group and we bought 40 companies, I felt like somebody had lifted my head and I'm on the beach and there is sand everywhere. And I'm like, why was I thinking so small as an entrepreneur? I really just had this fixed mindset in ways that I had no clue, because I didn't even understand, or I had no concept of ideas that I was exposed to. And so from that, I really started documenting and saying, hey, what can we as entrepreneurs learn about this process? And so I went and that experience of buying 40 companies and being part of that team, and then subsequently now helping others sell. I even did, I had 500 plus entrepreneurs that were part of a report on selling your company. And I also had 100 investment bankers and private equity firms. And I'll just share a couple of things that maybe, stand out, and then I'll give you some takeaways that really apply to the due diligence process as well. Really, one, you're seeing this is the thing that people said are the most difficult part of the exit. The good news for you is the due diligence isn't, the highest rated. Really, the highest that I think you have the biggest impact on is valuation, versus, finding the deal. But valuation is it's both art and science. And I don't think entrepreneurs understand that. And so, when I think about a couple situations, like when we were buying companies, I remember we went in, we bought a company in a bidding war for $30 million, and it was worth over $90 million to us the day we bought it. We already knew that. And so that idea of post-acquisition economics, like, what are you worth to someone else? I mean, they had no clue about that. And then also I remember working with a company that was getting offers at 65 million. We just rebuilt the story and put some things together and kind of, did some ways to increase the valuation. And literally within 6 months, they got an offer for 120 million, and they ended up closing on a deal for 150 million. So, I mean, talk about when I had first met that entrepreneur, they said, man, I just want to sell for 50 million. That would have been a home run. And then they end up selling for 150 million. And so value, it's like, what is your company value? It's such an opaque process. And there's, I think, so much confusion around that. And even in the research I did, I think a lot of entrepreneurs have no clue. When I asked entrepreneurs based on kind of a benchmark in the industry where they thought their company was valued, in that middle line going up and down is kind of the average of what, people were all over the map, because I don't think they have a clue. And then if you talk about what creates actual value, you'll see here you have, entrepreneurs think growth rate was the top rated value creation. And so, they really often focus on growth, where you have investment bankers say quality of earnings, right? Because I think a lot of investment bankers approach deals with a transaction, a financial transaction in mind. And so they just want to break your company down into pieces to really understand the financial model, because that's what they're selling. Where the buyers said, the most value is creating a clear competitive advantage. And in my experience, is if you have a clear competitive advantage and you understand how to use it, growth is a lagging indicator of that. So when you use your competitive advantage, you should be growing. Otherwise, you don't have a competitive advantage. And so I think a lot of buyers know that if there is a defendable competitive advantage and they take your company in, often they're looking at sales and marketing and what could they do to further take advantage of that and really get a lot of the value. So that to me is important. But let me just say, in terms of preparing and the due diligence process, what can you do now? One, I think it's in the entrepreneur community. I think a lot of people start their businesses in that myth. I was a CPA, now I started a CPA firm, or I saw a problem and I solved it, and that's, most of us start companies that way. But there's a whole world called product management. And there's a whole framework of understanding how to really understand why people buy, what you could do to improve your products and services. And so defining that competitive advantage, there's a world of art and science around that you can apply to your business. And I think that's going to be what I would work on now as a priority for any entrepreneur that will create the most value in the long run. And so people that have a competitive advantage and that know it, they go after the right customers with the right message in the right way, and that customer, it resonates, and so many good things happen: profit, growth, all of these awesome things. The second thing, and this is when I've seen people go into due diligence, and really, when you go into due diligence, it is you as a seller of a company, after you sign an LOI, you have lost most of your leverage. That is the highest point of leverage you have. After the LOI, all of the leverage goes away. And so you have to defend your revenue recognition. So I've gone in and I've seen transactions where if you're billing 50% upfront versus 50% at the end, I mean, there's all these different things where you're going to need to start looking at how you're billing and why they're going to maybe not recognize revenue that you have on the books. And they're going to say it's in the future, and it's going to be a ding on your value. I remember even when I sold my company, we had KPMG did a quality of earnings report on my company, and they were asking me questions of like, hey, 3 years ago in October, you were outside of the standard deviation up or down, and we had to explain every single detail and know all the reasons why our earnings were what they were. And so just be prepared to understand those things and to be able to defend them. Even with revenue recognition, there's things that they're going to try to bully you on that I think if you have the right accounting team who aren't just pencil pushers, but actually have some strategic thinking, they could defend the way you're doing revenue recognition, and it could translate into millions of dollars impact. The other one is, and this is pretty simple, but is document your business process. Go through and map your business and have your playbooks. As Robert said, you always want to be ready to sell, even if you're not planning on selling right now. And having those all documented and ready to go and up to date, that is what people are buying, and so have that. Another issue I've seen people get in trouble with in due diligence is their contracts and a lot of their legal agreements. So something like assignment of ownership. I remember, a lot of people, they just get these boilerplate contracts and they send their, to clients these contracts, or they sign leases or whatever, and they can't assign the ownership of those accounts. So they were not able to move accounts over. They had to go get every client to re-sign new contracts and do all this kind of stuff in the due diligence process, because there's no one asked them to do it, but they just grabbed a boilerplate contract and they couldn't assign the ownership of an account when they sold the company. And so there's just all sorts of things that you can do just on those kind of contracts to make sure you have your ducks in a row. Even things like if you say you're doing 6 month or 1 year long contracts, if you have a 30-day out, you basically are month to month, and it's you're going to lose multiples. So if you have long-term contracts where they can't get out, you might, let's say you get a 8, 9, or 10x, but if it's a month to month, you might only get 6x on earning. I mean, it can make a huge financial difference just on how you do contracts. And then, the other thing that I recommend is really building the deal rationale for the buyers and understanding the numbers and the narrative for why you're so valuable. And my dream is that when you build that deal rationale and you explain and you kind of understand why your company is valuable and who it's the most valuable to, that they're going to be in a room and with their investment team, or building a thesis on why they should buy it, and hopefully they're using your story and your graphs and your charts and your numbers to say, man, we've got to do this deal. So those are things that you could do now. And then I would just lastly say, when you're doing due diligence, you also want to do due diligence on the buyer. You'd never want to get into situations like Robert talked about where, maybe there's some financial situations that were changing in his environment, but you don't want to find a dealer that retrades your deal. And because you do get pregnant with a deal and it's so much emotional energy, you've gone too far and you kind of give up. And so if they retrade in the final moment and they're going to give you a lower deal term, you can really get yourself over a barrel. So doing the due diligence on the buyer, understanding that there's a certainty of close, understanding how they're going to finance it, understanding the past transactions they've done. If you're the first transaction, you realize you are literally rolling the dice of insanity to hope this deal goes through. And so, time is your enemy when you're in due diligence as well. So whatever, if you put together the sim or a data room, get it done fast, because the longer you wait, the more anything that happens, there's no upside for you. There's only downside, So close the deal as fast as possible, because you do not want that to be taking a moment. So that's all I was going to share, and happy to share some resources on the things that I've done, and I've interviewed a lot of EO members who have sold that both successfully and unsuccessfully, and have stories on either end, just so that you can learn if you'd like.
Awesome, thanks.
All right, I'll pick it up from here, Richard, and I want to thank both Robert and Drew, who I think really did a nice job of really getting into kind of what this due diligence looks like. I want to make one comment there, and then one on preparation, and turn it over to Matt, who really is our subject matter expert on this topic. But I think, when you think about due diligence, I think one of the things that we see in our experience, anecdotally, is first, all right, so from a buyer's perspective, what are they trying to do? They're really approaching this, trying to kind of de-risk this acquisition for themselves. They're trying to uncover problems and expose those in your business. So you need to be thinking about, well, as a buyer, I need to make sure as a seller, I need to recognize what those buyers are really going to be looking for. But ultimately, where we come into play really is what do you want to accomplish for you and your family? When Robert was talking about preparation, made me think about a quote from Abraham Lincoln that said, "I'll prepare and someday my chance will come." And so that preparation really doesn't start at the time you get that offer. It starts long before that. Part of that preparation, I think, is really the team of advisors you build around you. And Robert mentioned an important one, which is your spouse, but everything from your attorney to your CPA. But ultimately, we also feel like that financial advisor planner is going to be really important in that discussion about when that deal is done, have you accomplished what you originally set out for? And Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about that, what that might look like.
Sure, great, thank you. Well, Robert, Drew, great start. I'll be brief because I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for Q&A. Some things that Robert and Drew hit on, I think we see from clients, the identity crisis. We've seen that clients go through that process, what that's like. I'll ask a business owner as they're considering, are maybe looking at an exit, and I'll pose the question. If you've up into a friend at the grocery store and you sold your business, and they say, "What are you doing?" You have an answer for that question. If you don't, then you want to be thinking about those things. The other thing that we've seen often with clients is, I think Robert mentioned this, is things that are discovered in the due diligence process. A lot of times those sellers wish they had known years in advance, because one, they could have made a lot more money, but two, valuations would have been a lot higher. So I love that idea on audit yourself, or engage someone that can help you audit your team to see what a buyer might find in that due diligence process, because to Drew's point, you can add a lot of value there. As we mentioned earlier, we look to engage years in advance of the transaction to help a business owner position the assets to maximize value for themselves over their lifetime, but potentially future generations as well. So we look to create plans to try to minimize income, capital gains, estate taxes, and also, as much as possible, maximize credit protection for the resulting assets after the sale. So some of those things, there's a lot of things you can do prior to the sale and prior to the LOI. But once that LOI is signed, some of those abilities to get discounts on transactions in terms of giving to trust might be less. So we encourage people to engage early with your advisors to sort of plan for that. If you've got that contract signed and you haven't closed yet, there's still some things you can do. You could shift some of the assets to a trust to have the taxes paid by yourself that have the resulting assets out of the estate. There's a lot coming this week, we think this year, with regard to income taxes on a corporate level, but also on a personal level, including estate taxes. So if you haven't looked at that lately, I would really encourage you to revisit that. With that, I'll pause and kick it back to Richard for some Q&A.
Awesome. Appreciate that. It's great stuff. So time for Q&A. So let's drop them in the chat if we can, and we'll go through, and I'll just try to run through. And if I miss one, please tell me. So Marty, question from Marty was, what are the key indicators from a buyer that they have reached a point of no return, or are there? And I don't know who would like to grab that one. Just raise your hand.
Can you define what he means by that? Like they're not gonna do the deal?
I guess it could go both ways, right? Because the point of
Oh,
no
yeah.
return.
So my question is really like, how many no's are there, if that makes sense? Or in your experience, how many no's are there? Does that question make sense? Like, how many times can a buyer tell you no, but they really mean, that's just not a thing we can agree to, but we can maybe change here and there. You know, how many times can you walk away before they get true deal fatigue?
Well, I know in my deal, they had recently had stores to be shut down, and they were in a situation where they needed to grow. So they needed my location. So I knew it wasn't just about them acquiring an asset to drive revenue. They're thinking big picture. They're thinking scale. They're looking at economies of. So I knew the other reason. It wasn't about capturing, some future revenue. It was more like a more strategic purchase. So there was a different reason. So I guess the question would be, you would really want to make sure that you understand why they're buying the company. There's other reasons other than just to make some money on a deal. There's probably something else that you may even not know about.
And Marty, I would add that it's such a different environment with the buyer. Typically, they're an employee and they're sitting behind spreadsheets and math. And so while this is maybe the most important transaction of your life and your emotions and all the things we talked about, they don't give a shit. Like, honestly, they are just looking at a spreadsheet, and if the math is there, they will do the deal, barring that that there isn't something, either culture or, like your personal, what you're asking, is damaging the company and that future math. So I have seen sellers who are the most onerous people and are like, I literally was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person's doing it. They were just horrible throughout the whole process, but the buyer never wavered. I mean, they might have like pushed back, but they wanted to do the deal because the spreadsheet showed them it was worth it. And so I haven't seen that at that level.
Awesome, thanks. I've got a question. Obviously last year was crazy for all four of you. What differences between deals that were getting done in 2019 versus deals that might be getting done now? I'm assuming, what are the terms? I'm assuming that's going to be tied up in terms more than price, but what are you seeing that's different between those, pre-COVID and, hopefully post-COVID?
For me, I sold out of exhaustion, and had I stuck it out, there was another PPP loan coming out. I could have survived had I had a better sense of perspective. But for me, 2020 was too much uncertainty, which was scary. So that would be the key difference for me.
What I've seen is there's winners and there's losers in COVID. I think the losers, people that have been impacted, I think that if and when COVID clears out, if they can get back to where they were, I think they'll be able to kind of show, hey, COVID was a blip, but we're back. If you're a winner, I think you just need to be able to define and defend why, when COVID goes away, that you're, all of a sudden you're not going to start losing. So I mean, deals are still happening mainly because money's so cheap that now's the time. So I think there is a sense of urgency, and with future tax implications that are potentially on the horizon and other financial factors, I'm seeing a lot of people that doing deals. It just depends on how you were impacted.
Hey, Richard, and I would just add to that. I think from our perspective, I think a couple things, and some of this comes from the buy side, but I think post COVID, we've seen the SBA get a lot more aggressive in regards to not only what they guarantee, but waiving of fees, to doing 100% financing. And I think, as this group knows, that's a vehicle used a lot in business acquisition. And so it's going to create more opportunity for a buyer to maybe look at an opportunity. And then the other thing is just, you've got, everything from the silver tsunami to, business owners who've said, hey, I went through 08 and 09, I've been through COVID, I got to get out of this. Yep.
Just one thing real quick there. I think COVID came out of left field. So I think business owners focus on all those things they can control. And obviously COVID was not something that they could control at all. The other thing that we've seen is business owners maybe just looking at their businesses totally again. We did a NEO forum last February, right when COVID was on the radar globally, but obviously not in the United States. And two of the members there were already being dramatically impacted by logistics out of China. So I just think that business owners are starting to really think about their business totally differently. And if you're 65 and you've been through 2000, 2007, they're really looking at what that exit is going to look like now, very aggressively.
Good to know. So Emmett's got a question. So he wants to ask about, when is it right to find a person to run your business versus selling your business if you've lost the interest in the the part of running your own business? You guys have any comments on that?
Well, I think finding someone to run your business, in hindsight, I look back what the company could be today, and had I spent more time and energy fixing it than trying to sell it at the end of the year during the holiday season, I think it'd certainly be worth a lot more money. And finding the right-hand man to run it, someone could be excited about running your business. And so it doesn't have to be us. I would much rather take the cash flow from what I used to get than a lump sum that I got. And so I'd absolutely love to turn back time and find someone else maybe that has more energy to keep it going than I had at the time.
I'm going to comment on it too. I think some of it may have to do with how capable you are of getting out of the way. I was not very capable of getting out of the way. And so I think there's probably, something to that too. So anyway, anybody else?
It depends on your outcome of what you want.
True enough.
Hey, Richard, I'd also mention too that something that I think we're starting to see that it's becoming a little bit more of a popular option versus selling is considering an ESOP, and so that's something that I think you're gonna continue to hear more about.
Awesome. Thanks. All right, so we got a couple more minutes. So Matt's got a question too. He said, this is funny. So everybody's got a beard. I shaved mine this morning, true story. But anyway, the question is, when is the best time to tell your employees that your company is going out to market? That's a great question.
I'm assuming it's not going out. I mean, so I wouldn't tell them that. I would only tell them if I was getting a deal like where we're actually going to be in a transaction where we're going to sell the company. So what we did was after we signed an LOI, we told the leaders that a couple key leaders to help build the due diligence. And then then we were probably like a couple weeks out from certainty of close, like we knew it was going to happen. We then told the broader team and kind of had a whole plan around that. But I would not tell people that you're going out to market because you don't know if you're going to get an offer. And then now you've just created panic, and people always fill the gaps of uncertainty with bad things, not good things.
To add to that, Drew, that was a good one. To add to that, as soon as in order to close our deal, you got to imagine we had 46 electric service, 46 internet service, 46. I mean, think of all the vendors that go into running a retail operation. You need those operations people. And had I done it over again, I would have probably put a prize at the end to settle up everything. So listen, I'm going to pay you double in January and February if you can get to me to this point and get these tasks completed, and I'll work like a banshee to find you another job. I should have done that because that created, as soon as the signal goes out there, they start running, and they start leaving a lot of holes that you're left to fix. And I have literally spent January, February, and March and April every day is a mystery in the mailbox of some invoice that I owe or something that got dropped, some ball that, and I'm having to figure out and play a time machine and figure out what happened to clean it all up. So you need some operations people. They got to be on your side with some kind of incentive to stay on.
I think that's exactly right. And I think Drew nailed it too, from my opinion, was, tell the fewest, and what we did, we told people when they needed to know, and depending on the role, they needed to know at different times, and saying that when people have concerns, they don't assume the best. They're going to assume the worst every time. So anyway, what else do we have? Anybody else in there? Any more questions before we break out into groups?
Just wondering if Tom Turner had anything else to share. I know he had a successful sale years ago. No pressure, Tom.
No, I think these guys have covered it pretty well. I mean, I don't know. We had it was an interesting process. I think something Robert said triggered something, just remembered for us. I mean, we got way down the road with a private equity group that we thought we were going to do the deal at, and they ended up retrading the deal, which we had been, verbally guaranteed that they weren't going to do. And as luck would have it, we ended up having the original buyer that we wanted to do the deal with came back, and they threw us another offer on the table because they had not seen a press release. But time kills deals. I don't remember if it was Robert or Richard. I don't remember. Drew maybe said it, but I couldn't agree with that more. We were told by the group that we got in with that it was going to be a 30 to 45 day due diligence process, and we ended up being in almost 6 months. And a lot of things can happen in 6 months, and they did. An emotional roller coaster that really almost blew things up between me and my business partner. And he and I mean, business partnerships are like a marriage, right? In some ways, much more intense even than marriages. But I will say one piece of advice that we got that I thought was probably the best piece of advice. We ran a due diligence process on our investment bankers, right, to determine who the investment banker was that we wanted to work with. And thanks to EO, we ended up choosing a group that we met through EO. But one of the bankers that we talked to said, you can never perfectly time selling your business, but to the extent that these three things are in agreement, he said, I would tell you that's a good time. And one is, how is your business doing? And for us, at the time, our business was doing great. We were 7, 8, 9 years on the Inc. 500, 5,000. And so it was a good time in terms of our growth and profitability and all those things. Two is how are the broader industries doing, broader markets doing? And I think as, again, someone has already said, there's just a ton of capital on the sidelines right now. And it sounds like Drew especially has a lot of experience with this. The valuations that both strategic and financial buyers are willing to pay today are greater than any of us have ever seen in our lifetime. And so that was a really good time. And then the third was, how was our industry specifically? So how's your business, how's your industry, and how are the broader markets? And all three of those were in alignment for us. And so it made sense. But no, this has been a great presentation. I've enjoyed it. And I think these guys have really touched. I especially enjoyed Robert's emotional roller coaster, and I have journals through the process, and holy cow, yeah, it was just it was a lot of fun, but never ever thought I was so close to having a heart attack.
No doubt. All right, it's time to hit. Thank you so much, Tom, for that. Absolutely. I'm going to hit breakouts now. So Samira,